Hey crazy friends, it's Jay with Find Your Crazy. We're a family of 9 who live full-time in our RV with 5 of our kids as we travel the country to see every national park. But today we're going to be looking at another RV upgrade, reno, and maintenance video. Today we're going to be talking about greasing your axle bearings, which is hugely important. Today we're going to be talking about greasing your axle bearings, which is hugely important because when you don't do it, you can end up broken down on the side of the road with your wheel coming all the way off, which happened to us. You can click on that video up there to see when that happened because we had a failure. Now, greasing them, obviously, you can still have a failure if something goes wrong with one of your bearings, but it's definitely going to increase your opportunity not to. You should do it about once a year if you're full-timing and check them every 6 months. I talked to a small trailer axle guy that works on these all the time, and he said once a year is fine. He said as long as you, every 6 months, just pull them apart, check the bearings and make sure that there's nothing coming apart, put them back together, add just a little bit more grease, and you're ready to go for another 6 months. And then once every 6 months, you do what we're going to do in this video, which is take them apart, completely clean them, completely replace all of the grease, completely check every component, and repack them back in there. You're not going to need actually a lot of tools really to do this. The first thing, and we've got them all right here, the first thing you're going to need is obviously some grease so that you can repack them all. You want to make sure that you're getting high temperature grease, and to do, if you've got a 2-axle 4-wheel rig like mine, 2 of these buckets will be more than enough. Then you're going to need a seal puller. You actually don't have to have this thing, and you'll see what some of these are for as we go forward, but there's a seal on the back of your wheel that keeps all the grease in, and this just helps you to pull it out. You can do it with like a screwdriver and kind of bang it out from the other end, but honestly this thing is only like $7, and it is so worth it. And then you're also going to need replacement seals for the back of all your axles. These things are only like $7 as well. When you're pulling them out, they are just going to get a little bit mangled, and so the seal's not going to fit exactly right. You want to keep all that grease in there, and so you're going to want to get 4 of these. Then, depending on what kind of axle you've got, if you already have a castle nut that has a cotter pin in it, then you're going to need a replacement cotter pin. Those are really one-time use. Once you pull them out, you really want to get new ones to put back in there. However, if you've got older axles like I do, and we're going to show you this in a second, we're actually going to replace our nuts with castle nuts, and we're going to put a tang washer on there. And if you have this kind already, you're going to want to get 4 new tang washers so that you can lock them back in there, and you'll see that once we get going. Then you're going to want to get one of these guys. This is a bearing or grease packer, and I'll show you how this works in a few minutes, but you basically fill the bottom with grease, you put your bearing in there, and then you squish it down, and it pushes all of the new grease up in there. This thing is super simple, and just really you don't want to do it without it. You can hand pack them, but you can't beat this guy. And then finally, once you get everything off, you're also going to clean out your brake drums, and so you're going to need some brake cleaner to do that. And then just from a practical perspective, some gloves, you're really going to want to get those just because this is a super greasy process. I like to have a couple of pieces of cardboard to lay everything out on the ground so that it doesn't get dirty. And then you're going to want a bunch of paper towels. And this is one of those times that getting the actual shop paper towels, you're going to thank yourself. You're going to want to get several rolls of those because there's a lot of old grease up in there that's got to be completely cleaned out. So really this is it. Other than this, you're going to need just a couple of basic tools like some channel locks, maybe a screwdriver if you need to pry out some stuff, soft mallet that you can kind of tap everything back on there, and then of course something to get the lug nuts also you can take your wheel off before you start this entire process. So that's really all of the tools that you need. So let's get started on doing one. Of course I forgot something. I forgot to say I got all of this on Amazon. And it's all right there, and I'll put the links to all of this down in the description box so that you can get it there as well. So before we actually get started packing, let's talk grease guns. So your question is, why in the world are you taking apart and repacking all of your axles when almost all of them have a quick connect grease port right on the front? You just connect this thing up and squirt the grease in, and it squirts all the old grease out. Well, the problem with that is laziness. Let's fast forward a little bit and show you a picture of one of the axles once it's completely taken apart. So now that we've got everything off, you can see why we won't or don't want to use this quick grease valve. So basically there's a tube that runs from here all the way back to this little port right back here. Because when you put the grease gun on and are pushing grease through, it wants to start back here to push forward. Problem is all of those different pieces are on here. And so this is the seal that sits right back at the back, right up against that hole. And so rather than trying to push all that old grease through all of those different parts, a lot of times it'll just push the seal sideways, and then you're getting grease all around your brake drums, which obviously you don't want to do. And the problem with doing it that way is laziness. Listen, we're all lazy, right? Even grease is lazy. It's going to take the path of least resistance. And so when you think about the fact that you're trying to push that grease all the way to the back, and then you've got all that grease that's already packed in the axle that is trying to push out the front, so you've got this much distance of old grease that is having to force its way out, what's it going to do? It's going to push this seal off the back, and then you're actually squirting grease all into your brake hub. And so then, you know, grease and brakes don't necessarily mix very well. And so that's why you don't really want to do it with one of these. You want to do it the way that we're going to do it, completely take it apart and hand repack it. All right, so let's go ahead and knock out one of the tires. One of the first things that I do is just lay all of my tools out on the ground. I talked about those two pieces of cardboard. I cover one with a paper towel and then lay the other one beside it. And you'll see when we start to go, one of them is for putting all of the old, gross, greasy pieces on. And then once I clean them, I put them on the other one. That way I keep everything off the ground, everything laid out and kind of separated. And you'll see that in the process. So the first thing is to take the wheels off. So the first thing you got to do is jack it up a little bit. And that's going to, where you put that's going to vary a little bit, obviously, from rig to rig, but almost every rig you're going to have these U-bolts right here around your leaf springs, and that's a really strong point to put it at. You don't want to put it down on the axle or directly on the axle because it can damage that. So right there on the leaf spring is good enough, and raise it up just enough to get some tension off of it, and then we'll take the lug nuts off and take the tire off. So before you take the tire all the way off, I'm going to tell you to do one thing, and that's to give it a spin. Once it's jacked up, I mean, I took half the lugs off and jacked it up so that it's free floating. And then basically just one finger, you're just going to kind of give it a spin and see how it goes around about 3 or 4 times or so. Just remember that, because once you tighten everything back up, that's going to be your final kind of check to see if you tighten your lug too tight or didn't tighten it enough. Then you can take the rest of the tire off. Alright, so now we're ready to start taking the wheel apart. This is the time you probably want to don your gloves, because from this point forward it's going to start to get a little greasy. So the first step is to take off this dust cap, and I found the best way to do that is with a rubber mallet and just give it some light taps. And then once it starts to separate, then you can just get a screwdriver behind it and pry it out. All right. All right, now we're going to take off the outer nut, which on many of yours will be a tassel nut, which will look like this, and it may have a cotter pin stuck through one of these grooves, which you'll need to grab with a little pair of pliers or a pair of vice grips and pull it out through a hole through the spindle. Mine is an older one, so it doesn't have that. It has a regular nut, and then it has this cage on it. But the problem is these cages, the reason I moved away from them, is they tend to fail. They'll work themselves loose
like that, and then they're not really holding it anymore, and then your washer can work off, and then your tire can get loose. So we're actually going to replace this with a castle nut and a tang washer, which basically acts as the cotter pin and locks it in place, and we'll show you when we put that back on. So we're just going to pry the cage off, and that's, you can see this is where these two pieces of cardboard start to come in handy. One that's everything that's clean, and one's going to hold everything that's dirty. Then you should need a wrench. Take off this washer. We'll set this aside for now. We're going to throw that away later. And then inside of this is your spindle washer. So once you get those two off, then you're ready to kind of pull the whole hub off. Paper towel down to hold it on. This thing's pretty heavy. The magnet for the brakes is down under there, so you're just going to kind of pop it sideways, and that's going to release it, and then you can wiggle that guy out and get the outer bearing. And there you go. So now we're going to disassemble the back part of the hub. So we're going to take this seal out, and then that's going to allow us to take the inner bearing. This is where that seal puller is really nice. You can see this thing is like really stuck in there, lots of grime and stuff around it. And so you just get this guy underneath it and start popping it around. But you can also see how in doing that we've kind of bent up the seal, which means it's not going to work as good anymore. So that's why we're just going to throw that guy away. And then here is your larger inner bearing. Then inside of here, you still got your two races. The races are the metal rings that the bearings ride on, and their two metal rings are knocked down inside of there. You don't have to take those out unless there's something wrong with them, which we're hoping these aren't. Once we get everything cleaned out, we'll inspect it and see. All right, so we're going to start by cleaning off the spindle. So just grab it there from the back and pull it on out. You're just wiping around and trying to just wipe all that excess old grease off. Again, you know, you're not trying to eat off the thing or anything, but just getting it clean. All right, now it's time to clean everything up. So we're going to start by cleaning the pieces back here. And I've laid out a clean paper towel on one of my boards to keep everything. We start with the spindle washer, then the two bearings. And the bearings, you're not going to be able to get all the grease from the inside of it, but when we repack them, the new grease will push the old grease out with the grease packer, and I'll show you how that's going to look in just a minute when we repack them. Basically, you're just trying to get most of that excess off. Now, the other thing that you're doing once you get these clean is you also want to be inspecting them. And so you're going to go around and you're looking at all of these different rollers inside of this cage around it, making sure that none of them have any spurs, none of them are deformed. You're also looking at the cage, this thing that holds it, to make sure that there's no cracks or bends anywhere in it. Also that there's no discoloration. I have not seen any of that on any of mine, but I'm told that if they get too hot, it can give a discoloration to the metal. So again, just cleaning them off and inspecting them. Inner washer, inner bearing, sorry, outer bearing. It gets confusing. So again, we're looking at all of the rollers, looking at the cage, make sure none of them are loose. Looks good. All right, then we're going to get all the old grease out of the cavity of the hub. And so just reach in there and start wiping it all out. Once you get the top out, I've found it's easier just to go in with your hands because there will be a bunch. There's a cavity up in there, and we're going to have to refill that cavity with good grease, but you got to get all the old grease out first. And it's just more, honestly, than a paper towel can handle. And so just reach down in there and get all that good old nasty grease out of there. You see now why the gloves are important? All right, now that we've got it cleaned out, you can see this silver piece right here, kind of a cone piece. This is your race. That is what the bearings sit up against and they roll against. It does come out, but they are wedged in there really, really good. I'm talking about a pretty big hammer and chisel to be able to knock those things out. They do have a puller that you can get, but you shouldn't need to take them out unless there's some kind of problem. So basically just run your finger around it. As long as they're smooth, there's no nicks or burrs or scratches in them, you're good to go. If you ever do have a problem with either your bearing or your race, I have been told by several guys that it is important that you change both of them, not just one of them, because they're kind of matched up. And so I've had a couple guys tell me that it doesn't really matter, but I've also had several guys tell me that it is going to be a lot better if you just change them both out. And if you got to change one, a lot of times they come in a set, so it's not a big deal. Once we've got most of that cleaned out, then we're going to turn it over and clean it up from the other side. And you can see the outer race up in there as well. So the next thing you want to do is clean the inside of the hub where the brake ride up against it, and that's where the brake cleaner comes in. And you're just going to get it and spray it really good all over it, and it's going to break down all of that nastiness that's in there. I just dump it out into a paper towel. And then just wipe her out. So the last thing you want to do before you start repacking and then reassembling is to just examine your brake shoes here to make sure that your brake pads, that's this little part on the outside, this stuff's pretty thin. Always, this isn't like the brakes on your car, and so it's pretty thin to start with. So these look really, really good. Making sure that your magnet's still got movement, and then on the inside of your hub that you don't have any uneven spots around the outside of your hub. All right, so when you're doing, if you do have to replace your brakes, If you have to replace the whole brake assembly, then it's pretty easy. You just bolt off. There's 5 bolts, 2 wires. The wires are not positive and negative, so it doesn't matter how they connect. So it's pretty easy, and then all you have to do is adjust it with a brake spoon, and I'm going to show you how to do that while it's off, because it's a lot easier to see than once it's all on, but you don't adjust it until it's all on. All right, so this is a lot easier to see when it's not up on there. This is what you're going to be adjusting. You see these little teeth right here. And so your spoon, brake spoon, is going to go through the back, and then that way you can adjust the brakes. There you go. And so once it's on there, it's just hard to see, but that's what's going to happen. Once it's mounted, you'll stick this through the back and you'll wind it until it's tight, and then you'll come off it a couple of clicks and then spin it and see if there's any resistance. If there is, you come off it a little bit more, and that'll happen once it's all mounted. So now, just as a reference, these things will be housed inside the hub, but just to give you an idea of how they sit on the spindle. And so the seal is going to be in the back of the hub, and that'll end up right back there. You've got your inner race, which is going to sit in there like so, and then inner bearing, and then the race will be on the hub on the outside of it. And then those 2 pieces go in the hub first before it goes on. And then after the hub goes on, you got your outer bearing. Then you've got your spindle nut. Then if you have one of these spindles that has the flat spot on the side of it, that's when you're going to want to get one of these tang washers. And so it goes next. If you don't have one, if you have one that's all the way around and has the hole through it, then you're going to need the cotter pin and not that, so you just won't have that. And then finally, either way, is going to be the castle nut. And so that's what the inside of it looks like before. Obviously, once you get it all greased up, you can't see any of that. All right, now it's time to start repacking. The first thing you want to do is fill that cavity back that was inside of there. You don't want to fill this whole thing up, obviously, with grease, because the spindle is going to come through and you just end up squirting a bunch of it back out. But between the 2 races, there's definitely kind of a divot back there. And really the best thing to do that with is a paint stirrer. And I thought I had one, but couldn't find it. And so I'm just using this flat piece of trim that I had, but a paint stirrer is the best thing. So you're just going to scoop out some grease and then wipe it all around on the inside of there. And you're looking to fill that little void that's basically back between the 2 races. And then you can use that flat edge, squish it down in there, which is why a paint stirrer is such a great tool for this. Now you're ready to use your bearing packer. I realized that I probably should have showed you this on the first tire before it got all nasty. But basically this part screws on and off, and then there's that suction cup part that's in there. And so that comes out, and then you just scoop out some grease with your hand and put it in here, and then put the plunger back down in there, and then you're ready to go. So take this off. We're going to do our our inner bearing, the bigger one, first, because once it's done, we're going to be able to drop it just right down in there. And so you're going to put it in there little side down and kind of center it up in there. Then you're going to screw this guy back down on top of it. And then you're just going to push. And sometimes I find it's easier to put it down on the ground. Make sure you can see that. And you can see as I'm pushing, that old black grease is getting pushed out and all the new red grease is getting pushed in. And so I'm basically going to keep pushing until I see that red grease coming out. All right, there you go. So now I can see the red grease in there. So I'm just going to get this old grease off first. with my finger, throw it away. Then unscrew this guy. Reach in there and get our race. You can see it's all full packed up in there with grease everywhere. We're going to drop her right down in that race. Make sure it's nice and covered in grease. Never have too much grease. Any extra is going to end up squirting back out anyway, and so you can never have too much in there. I'm going to go ahead and drop my outer race back down in there so that I'm ready to go. All this old nasty grease off. Again, it's in there, small part down. I'm going to screw the cone back on it. Push that. Alright, I'm going to set this one aside for a second because now that we've got the inner bearing, the big one, down inside of there and seated in its race, now we're going to put the back seal back on. So you're just going to kind of set it in there. And this is a good place again for that rubber mallet, and just slowly holding the opposite side down, begin to tap it down. Until it's flush all the way around. There we go. Now we're just going to wipe off the outer part so that there's no extra grease out here where the brake's at. And we're ready to put it back on. Okay, so we're going to put the hub back on. You can see some of that extra grease like we talked about came back out. Get extra grease. Pack back in there. Take our outer bearing and squish him back up in there. Yeah. All right, then we've got our spindle washer. Again, yours could just be round, or it could be the D-washer if you have that flat side. And it's important that washer goes first, then the tang washer, then the castle nut. Again, if you have a completely round spindle threaded there at the end with a hole in it, then you're not going to have the tang washer. You're just going to put the castle nut, and then you'll put the cotter pin through. All right, then we're going to tighten this guy down. Now, here's the trick here. You want to use just a normal size wrench, not something with a big long handle on it. And you're basically just going to tighten it until it's hand tight. Then you're going to back off just a little bit. Then you're going to test your wheel. So you're going to take it and spin it a couple times to get that grease moving in there. But then you're going to back it a little bit more. Basically, you want to be able to spin this kind of with a couple of fingers in it, spin around one time. And once that's the case, and you always want to make sure there's no movement in or out or side to side, because then that'll be magnified as your wheel's on as you're going down the road. Once you get your wheel on, the wheel adds extra weight and leverage, and it'll spin further. But with just the hub, about one turn is what you're looking for. So the tang washer has these two little tabs on it. And basically what you're going to do is you're going to micro adjust. Once you get it where you want it, you're going to micro adjust that castle nut until one of those two is lined up with the voids, the spaces in the castle nut, as it is right here. And then I'm just going to bend that back. And there you go. Now that nut is locked in place. Now you're ready for the dust cap to go back on. Again, that's just going to be a couple little taps around with the mallet. And there you go. Now your wheel's repacked. All we're going to do is put the tire back on. All right, so that's it. It's that easy. Something you can definitely do. I am no mechanic. I am no handyman. I'm just a full-time RV guy, and I can do it. I, talked to a couple of mechanics and a couple of small trailer guys. I kind of got some schooling and then did it a couple times. I mean, it's super, super simple. I promise you can do it. Save yourself a lot of time and a lot of money, because this is something that needs to be done again annually and checked every 6 months. If you do that, you'll be rolling on down the road pretty smoothly. All in all, it took me between 35 and 45 minutes per wheel when I wasn't filming. If you had an electric impact wrench and could take those lug nuts on and off and not have to do it by hand like I did, you could probably cut 10 minutes off of that and be down to about 30 minutes a wheel. So really a half-day project. I used one full can of brake cleaner and a tub and a half of grease in doing it. Super cheap, super easy with just a few tools. You can have yourself on the road smoothly and avoid the catastrophe that we had, again, breaking down on the side of the road when bearings overheat. That's a much bigger problem and can do a lot more damage. We got pretty lucky the time it happened to us. So if you haven't subscribed to our channel, we'd love for you to do that. You can hit that subscribe button over there. You can also check out some of our other videos. Check out our weekly travel vlog as well as our national park family tour guides. We'd love to have you come along.